Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So, alhamdulillah, I am now in Birmingham, in Shaykh Asrar Rashid's house, who has read my book. He picked up a copy last year and has read it through. So we decided to sit down and have a discussion about it and discuss the more salient points therein.
Firstly, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ahlan wa sahlan to our brother Mahdi Luck. And yes, your book, I studied the entire book, read the book cover to cover, and what I found interesting was what you mentioned regarding Islam surviving in what you term, well, the term Anglosphere is an old term. I've heard intellectuals use that term also, but you've popularized this more amongst Muslim circles, the term Anglosphere. What you mentioned regarding Islam surviving in the West, that you see no future for Muslims in the West. So that was more or less the conclusion of the entire book.
Yeah. So I'll have to expand on that. Okay, actually, first of all, regarding the term Anglosphere, I got that term from Daniel Hannan, he's a conservative MEP. I believe he's the one who actually coined the term, but he was using it back in 2014, I think it was. He wrote a book called How We Invented Freedom, and he was talking about Anglosphere, because we call this term Anglosphere because he talked about how the English went out and populated these areas, what is now Canada, the United States,
Australia, New
Zealand. So those 5 countries, those are the English-speaking countries. And then he would argue and further and say that like what we call globalization is really Anglobalization, because we see people around the world wearing suits and ties. The suit and ties were originally an English thing. People are using English as their medium of like their lingua franca and day-to-day activities. So it's more of an anglicizing of the world, as opposed to like a Europeanizing or a westernizing of the world. That's the first thing. Now, as for the future of Islam in the West, I'm basing a lot of that, because what we have in the book for readers who have come across that chapter is what I call these 4 abominations, which were starting with Fiqh of minorities. Fiqh of minorities in 2001. So when Imam Hamza al-Bolti made that pronouncement, the first one, there's 2 ones, there's 2001, 2003. The first one he made in 2001, and this was after organizations based in Europe like
European Fiqh Council.
Yeah, the European Fatwa Council.
Yeah.
Which again, that's something else that Imam al-Bolti has commented on, because not everyone on that panel is actually Mufti. So you can't call it a Fatwa Council, because if you're going to call something a Fatwa Council or a Fiqh Council, then everyone on that panel should be a Mufti or a Faqih. The same way if you have like medical council, everyone should be a doctor, right? So he said at that time that if prior to this time we thought that Islam was the fastest growing religion in the West, that it was just spreading like fire, everyone was embracing it, but then we realized this Fiqh of minorities is rearing its head. That means that Islam is now being subsumed into the dominant Western culture, and it's losing its identity. It's just going to be dissolved. And he said that if we allow this to happen, you're going to get different Islams, local Islams. You'll have like a British Islam, an American Islam, a Canadian Islam, a French Islam, whatever it is, and they'll be totally unrecognizable they'll be totally, I should say, distinguished from the Islam you find in the Muslim heartlands. So he was making this pronouncement back in 2001. And the other thing he pointed out is he quoted Surah An-Nisa in 97, where Allah talks about hijrah. It's not Allah's earth vastness, so they make hijrah in it. So he said, if you ever have a problem implementing your faith in what is Dar al-Kufr, like a land that is dominated by the unbelievers, then you leave. That's the solution. You don't change the laws just to fit where you are.
With regard to minority fiqh, it was introduced not only by the European Fatwa Council, but other intellectuals as well in the West.
Yeah.
But I would say it's not picked up in the UK as quick as it has picked up in other countries like the US.
Yeah, maybe not in name, but you see this sort of
trend.
This sort of trend, right, where we're now getting the point of, say, women leading prayers, then we get, you know, homosexual marriages.
Amina Wudud came early 2004 or around 2005. She came to the UK in Oxford and she led a few dozen men in prayer. And there was some Imam in Oxford, based in Oxford, who actually went to South Africa and opened a masjid in Cape Town, open to homosexuals and well, people who pronounce homosexuality as being permitted in Islam. Otherwise all masajid are open to
everyone,
but saying that homosexuality is permitted in Islam is disbelief, kufr. So there are some people who are now pronouncing that as permitted, but that wouldn't fall into the parameters of minority fiqh as outlaid by Shaykh Abdulla bin BAYYAH or others.
Not explicitly, but what I'm getting at is once you start that sort of principle where you say, okay, we're in the West and there are different circumstances and therefore we have to create different rules and different rulings, that opens the door for other stuff to come along later. So you can start off with which the things that they did. For example, they started off with the whole thing about mortgages, right? Saying it was perfectly halal to get a mortgage because because you're in the UK or the US, you're now in Dar al-Harb, right? They totally abuse like this is from Hanafi method.
لا ربا بين الحرب ومسلم لا ربا بين حربي ومسلم في دار الحرب. At the end of every Babu Riba in the Hanafi Fiqh works, you'll find that is the last sentence. So you check Sharh al-Wiqaya, you check Al-Ikhtiyar, you check all these works, they have that. And Al-Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he based that ruling on a mursal hadith. So the Shafi'is, when they respond to this, they respond by saying the hadith is mursal and whatnot.
It's cut off,
But the meaning of the ruling is that a Muslim is allowed to benefit from the disbeliever. So in the Hashiyah of Ibn Abdin, he mentions that if the Muslim takes a dinar and gives away 2 dinars, so he's giving away more and taking less. Some people are under the impression, and I think Sarakhsi mentions this in Al-Mabsut also, that this means the Muslim can give riba. But what they are referring to there is that in the old days they had inferior dinars and dinars which were pure gold. So the Muslim is taking a pure gold dinar and giving away inferior quality dinars. So he's benefiting from the transaction. So some of them attempted to say the riba transactions that occur now in the West with mortgages would fall under this ruling. So basing that on the Darul Harb basis. But additional to that, some of them said it's permitted out of darura because of the legal maxim of darurat tubih al-mahdhurat. So those are 2 different things. Meaning if the darura necessity is such that a person, if he does not take out a mortgage, he will live on the roads, or his family will be moved to a place where they will be harmed, then that person is permitted in that circumstance to carry out a riba based transaction. But if you base the ruling on saying that there's no riba between a Muslim and a Harbi in Darul Harb, then that would permit all types of riba transactions without any parameters, without looking at particular circumstances. But the reality is that ruling is referring to when the Muslim benefits in the transaction with the non-Muslim, not when the Muslim is harmed. So then some of them attempt to reinterpret that by saying if you rent for a long time, in the long run you will benefit only if you buy the property, not if you rent the property. But how this relates to minority fiqh, what is called Fiqh al Aqalliyyat, which is a new term as well, the term is new, is in reality what Fiqh al Aqalliyyat should be renamed is Fiqh al Dururat.
Yeah.
Meaning, what's the difference between looking at the darurat, necessities, and hawa'ij,
Yeah.
essentials of
Yeah,
people's
but this is what
lives?
Imam Abulti made in his statement. The point he made, I mean, well, actually, let's go back to the previous point again about Dar al-Harb, is that, like, the UK or Europe, and it's not Dar al-Harb, it's Dar al-Kufr. It's not Dar al-Harb because Muslims are not being persecuted here. We're not in a war zone here.
But even that, when they use the term Darul Harb in the fiqh works, they use the term Darul Harb as a broad term. Within Darul Harb, even though the word Harb is used, it's used because nations could potentially go to war. But all of Darul Kufr would fall under the rubric of Darul.
I think we see it differently in the Shafi madhab.
No, they'd use the term loosely.
But we would say Dar al-Harb, Dar al-Kufr is the broader aspect. That's where the unbelievers rule, and Dar al-Harb is that part of Dar al-Kufr where Muslims are being oppressed and persecuted.
What they in the Hanafi fiqh works, what they mean when they say the term Dar al-Harb is any land which is governed by disbelievers, governed, and that's it.
Yeah.
Meaning, but they use the term Dar al-Harb. It does not entail that Muslims are entering that. So they'll say a musta'min can enter. Musta'min is a non-believer who takes security in Darul Islam. So in today's day and age, that would be taking visas. So if someone enters
seeking asylum,
they will be termed as musta'min. So إذا دخل المستأمن في دار الإسلام, meaning the one who seeks security enters Darul Islam, meaning in modern jargon that would be a non-Muslim who lives in a non-Muslim country enters a Muslim country with a visa. So they mention these type of fiqh rulings, but the term Darul Harbi is used, or Harbi, but it doesn't mean that the Harbi is taking up arms against the Muslims. So this is a misreading some people have when they read those fiqh works. So they may use the term Harbi or the term Darul Harb, but what is not entailed is war. Not at all times. Sometimes Al-Imam al-Shaybani rahimahullah in earlier fiqh works will mention a scenario during actual warfare. But generally speaking, it's not in terms of warfare, it's in terms of classifying the world into Darul Harb and Darul Islam. But Darul Harb again is a broad term, which some scholars today would use the term Darul Kufar, or Darul Amn.
Because I put that piece together on my blog where you have, it's by Imam Zuhaili and Imam Abulti, and they put it this way, where Darul Kufr is the broader term, and the Darul Harb is that subset within Darul Kufr, where Muslims are being persecuted, or there's being...
Some scholars use the term Darul Amn, an abode of security. Some use the term Darul Kufr. But in the Hanafi works, when you find Darul Harb, it's a broad term which all these categories fall into, because there is potential of war.
So basically the European Fatwa Council is not even consulting the Hanafi fiqh books to see what they actually mean by these terms.
I'm not too familiar with the Fatwa Council, but what I do know is that fiqh rulings don't change from one country to another, except with exceptional rulings which are mentioned, for instance, regarding Bughat, rebels, or rulings pertaining to Darul Harb, which are mentioned in the Hanafi works, like inheritance laws. If a person lives in Darul Harb, if a person lives in Darul Islam, and non-Muslims, certain laws applying to them. But generally speaking, for a Muslim, if he travels from Egypt to France, the rulings are the same. The only rulings that may change is what we would term darurat, or hawa'ij. So Shaykh Abdulla bin Bayyah, his work, he has a work on Fiqh al Aqalliyyat. I've got that in the other room, and that work would be really a work of darurat, meaning the qawaid fiqhiyya that he employs, or the usul al-fiqh. And this is also something else regarding calls by some people to rewrite usul al-fiqh. You must have heard about people calling for...
We're writing usul, because Imam Abulti have debates with people about this. Because what he goes into in his statement, his pronouncement against fiqh minorities, he does say that this distinction between... It's one thing to have, say, fatwa for darurat, right? So if someone's in a situation in a country like this where they need to survive for whatever reason it is, something like you said, daruras come up and they seek a fatwa, that's one thing. But then to write a whole new fiqh just because you're living here, that's a whole different ball game. That's where we're taking things too far.
But these calls for rewriting usul al-fiqh, that's similar to saying the rules of nahw, grammar should be rewritten. Meaning,
you're changing everything.
Istiqra.
Yeah.
How would we translate istiqra?
Like thorough investigation.
Inductive investigation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, istiqra for viewers, give a simple example of istiqra.
I mean, istiqra. I mean, most common example we have in Shafi fiqh is like where Imam Shafi himself worked out the lengths for menstruation and so forth.
He even knocked doors of.
And talked to and asked women, right? So the Shafi books will say like Imam Ibn al-Qasim al-Ghazi will say in his Sharh on the Matn al-Qadi Abu Shuja', he'll say that وَدَلِيلُ ذَلِكَ الْإِسْتِقْرَاء, right?
So an example of istiqra would be you go to a place and you go around asking everyone a particular thing, and whatever the overwhelming majority answers with, you would give a judgment. So nahw grammar, the rules of grammar are such that the grammarians, they explored all the different rules of grammar and they picked them up and wrote down the works of nahw until they exhausted the subject. Yes? So once they exhausted the subject, later generations cannot come along and say there are new rules to grammar, or we are going to place a new paradigm to all of grammar and rephrase grammar in new books.
That's impossible.
That would be impossible. So usul al-fiqh, what is usul al-fiqh?
It's the same principles.
Usul al-fiqh is the rules that apply to
how we derive rules from text. It's because another room for usul al-fiqh is ilm tafsir al-nusus, like how do we understand the text, the Quran and the Sunnah, and how do we derive rulings from them?
So someone cannot come along now
and rewrite that
and say we're going to rewrite all of the methods employed by jurists in extracting legal rulings. So these calls now for rewriting usul al-fiqh, or not even calls for rewriting usul al-fiqh, you also have people who give rulings on their own assumptions. You do know this is.
I mean, people do things where they'll do ijtihad where there already is a clear text, right? So I've seen people out here in Europe. I mean, someone wrote a book, some scholar based here, I don't want to mention names, but he wrote a book called Islam Ahda Zawjayn, right? Trying to argue that if let's say if a woman who's not Muslim becomes Muslim and she's still married to a man who's not Muslim, she doesn't have to leave him, because that would be a hardship, that would be a burden on her. But that contravenes a clear text in the Quran, Surah Al-Mumtahina ayah 10, that a disbelieving man cannot be with a believing woman.
So don't you think this is similar to, or not very similar, there is a distinction between the reformists, Muhammad Abdu and Rashid Rida and all that group of people. The difference between them and the people who are calling for ijtihad now is jahl, meaning those shuyukh of Al-Azhar at that time, irrelevant to our disagreements with them, they were not juhal, they were not ignorant. They went through the traditional classical learning, and then they came out, they were influenced by the British colonialists at that time, and they came out with calls for reform and whatnot, and they were refuted by Imam Yusuf al-Nabahani and others. But now you have the likes of this woman Manji from Canada.
Irshad Manjid,
even she performs ijtihad. So you may this call for ijtihad by the Shaykh that you mentioned. I don't know who he is, but he may be learned in a in a certain regard.
He definitely is learning to a certain extent.
But then they've opened the door up for Irshad Manji. And then you have others as well.
Who don't even know Arabic or anything like that. Because again, the door we're opening, what happens at that point? Once you open that door, you're basically opening the floodgates. That means if everyone can do their own ijtihad. But if everyone can do their own ijtihad, then everyone's going to have their own religion.
So Amina Wadud, she led men in prayer. And there's certain people who accept that ijtihad. what they call ijtihad, because ijtihad is only done
in the absence of a text.
In the absence of
Text.
Meaning,
hadith.
So we'll say, if the Quran is explicit regarding something, or the hadith is explicit, then we have space for ijtihad.
Yeah.
So these people are performing ijtihad in those things where there's
clear text, and there's ijma as well.
So permitting homosexuality, allowing women to lead prayers. What else do you have? Hijab is not fard.
These kind of things.
And then the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam foretold that toward the end of time women will pray in haid. Meaning people will give that fatwa.
Yeah. Women will pray menstruating.
Yeah, while menstruating they will pray. And there will be groups of people that will say there's only 3 prayers and not 5 prayers.
Okay.
And this is one of the in Mustadrak of Imam al-Hakim. This is one of the Ashratu Sa'a. So Fiqh al Aqalliyyat was one of those things that you tackled in the book.
Yeah.
But with Fiqh al Aqalliyyat, of course, minority fiqh, this would fall into what we would call Fiqh al Dururat.
Yeah.
But others have relabeled.
Yeah. A Fiqh al Aqalliyyat, but it's like you're setting up a separate fiqh, and then that fiqh creates what it leads to eventually is where, you know, Muslims from these countries like America or Canada, they will become unrecognizable. Like they will look so different and appear to be so different from Muslims in the Muslim heartlands. And I used to see that when just living in Morocco. Like living in Morocco, we used to have Americans coming over, because where I was teaching English and I was studying Arabic as well. You know, university classes from the United States would come over regularly, and then be summer courses or summer groups rather. They would come over, and the Moroccans would just look at them like they're just weird. Just think, like what's with these people? Like we can't tell like who's a Muslim, who's not. When we look at the group.
So you have 2 extremes. You have the pseudo-Salafi movement that calls for people moving away from the 4 schools and going into a directly accessing the Quran, the Sunnah for legal rulings.
Yeah.
And on the other side of the spectrum, you have people calling for ijtihad as well, but they're not from a pseudo-Salafi background. They come from traditional Sunni backgrounds, meaning initially they will adopt either the Maliki school, or they have the Hanafi school, or the Shafi'i school, or the Hanbali school, and then they move on to this reformist mindset. Like in America, you had Yasir Qadi, who in the early 2000s was following pseudo-Salafism. And then he moved to the reformists, so he'll call Rashid Rida and others now. And then you have people from a traditional Sunni background, and they move to this reformist mindset of ijtihad. And what this leads to is what you're saying is an Islam or a practice of Islam which is unrecognizable.
It's not recognized in the Muslim heartlands. And I think, what I'm saying is fiqh of minorities opened the door for that. Fiqh of minorities was the start, they started the ball rolling with that. Because then what you had after that was when they had the big unity pact, which I think was in 2007, when the people from those 2 backgrounds, you know, what you said, the pseudo-Salafis and the traditional Muslims, they came together and said, we're all together, we're united. And then they also said in that statement that Muslims shouldn't study theology in depth. They said that you should just stick to the 6 pillars of faith, just stick to you know, Allah, His angels, His books, His messengers, and that's it. Which as I raise in my book, I find that really disturbing, because as a believer and you want to build your relationship with Allah, you need to know who Allah is and what He's promised you. So if you're not going to talk about Allah's promise of salvation based on faith alone, you're not going to talk about seeing Allah in the hereafter, you're not going to talk about having a direct relationship with Allah in this life without the intermediary of a priest or whatever it is, and you put those things aside because you don't want to have controversy, and you make the theology just very stale and just whatever it is, just standardized, and you don't go any deeper, you're cutting people off. And these are major things within Sunni theology.
But if people don't study Sunni theology, they will not be able to counter current trends like militant atheism.
Yeah, there's that aspect of it, and there's also the personal aspect of just developing your relationship with Allah. How are you going to do that?
Spiritual.
Spiritual aspect. How are you going to do that if you don't know what Allah has promised you, how Allah is addressing you in the Quran, the fact that you're supposed to be having a direct relationship with Him?
But here, I want to get on to motives. So, the promotion of Fiqh al Aqalliyyat primarily has two motives I can see. One is political motivation, and secondly, for Fiqh al Aqalliyyat, this is minority fiqh, is considering Islam difficult to follow as it is. This is a common trend now, where people find Islam difficult to follow, meaning because they find it difficult to get up and perform wudu, even though I was just with you now, and we were discussing about praying Asr time, Asr Salah, the late noon prayer, and you said to me, you're a traveller as a Shafi'i, you've combined Zuhr and Asr, so I would see that as ease.
That's easy.
So Al-Imam Jalaluddin As-Suyuti rahimahullah has a book called Jazil al-Mawahib fi Ikhtilaf al-Madhahib, where he mentions the four schools as being like the qira'at. Even though the qira'at are directly from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he left sallallahu alaihi wasallam a aspect of the religion, which Al-Imam Zahid al-Kawthari says 20% of the legal rulings open for debate by people, scholars who are qualified to perform ijtihad. So this was for ease for the nation. So ikhtilafu ummati rahma, even though some people contest the authenticity of the hadith, the statement is true. Ikhtilafu ummati rahma, but ikhtilaf in those furu', the 20%. So you were able to perform your Dhuhr and Asr with ease. So what difficulty are they referring to? Meaning, if you look at the four schools and the ease that is found, for instance, M&Ms, the sweets, they have one of the M&Ms which is red colored, is made from beetles, beetle extract. Yes, so in the Hanafi school that would be haram because it's from hasharat, insects. But in the Maliki school, that would be permitted. Yes? So what difficulty are they referring to? Meaning you have the four schools. And by the way, this brings us to another discussion which is not to do with our, meaning regarding taking from the four schools, but that's not our subject. But what difficulty are they referring to? Because when I study the four schools, I read 2 volumes of I'lamul Anam with Shaykh Nuruddin Itr, his own work, I'lamul Anam, 2 volumes of that work.
The Sharh Maram.
No, Shaykh Nuruddin Itr. His commentary on Bulugh al-Maram.
That's right.
Yes, and that was Al-Fiqh al-Muqaran, looking at the four schools and their proofs, and so all we observe is ease in the four schools. So what difficulty are they referring to as minorities? Because both of us are born in the West. Yes, we grew up in the West. Personally, I know that there's difficulties in certain things, but there are many of these things which people bring up have more of a political motivation and another aspect of an inferiority
complex.